thank you all for coming this evening. I know it's always hard to peel away after work or running kids around, so we really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us tonight. My name is Krista Siringo, and I am the chair of the Community Engagement Committee for the Mount Abraham Unified School District School Board. It's a mouthful. And our committee is made up of board members as well as community members and staff and students. And we've been working together for about a year now. And we've had a couple of different things we've been focusing on. Some of that focus has been informed by interviews that maybe some of you participated in this past spring, where we asked community members lots of questions, but a couple of them were around what do you think it's really important for the community to have input into with respect to education in our district? And we heard lots of different responses, but the two most popular were facilities, specifically Mount A, but let's talk about facilities. And then also communication. So folks felt like we had some work to do repairing and rebuilding our communication channels, and also some concern that we are now a unified board and might have less opportunity to stay connected with each individual town since the elementary schools no longer had a school board. So those goals really aligned with what the newly unified school board was thinking. We were recognizing the need to stay connected as representatives of each town, to stay connected with those community members. And we also were looking at what we were now shepherding the work of 6 school buildings. So not just Mount A, but thinking about what is our plan for our facilities in the future. But we also saw that we had had 3 failed bond votes to repair Mount A, which we all, I think, probably can agree that it needs and still does need some work. So our Community Engagement Committee decided that those 2 goals, communication channels and facilities, were a really good place to start. And with the help of our facilitator, who I'll introduce in a moment, we've developed a process that we think is going to try to tackle both of those goals at the same time. So a process that really helps us to build relationships with our community, to get input into what people think is most valuable in our schools currently and what they vision for our schools in the future. And then steer some of that conversation toward facilities, because that is a pressing need. The goal with these conversations, so there are 3 of them. The first in the series is happening in each of the 5 towns. It's also happening with student groups and with staff. And so this first conversation series is around identifying what our vision is and our goals for our students when they graduate from Mount A. What do we want them to have learned and experienced? What skills do we want them to have? And how can we support them in that process? Then we'll come together on November 5th as a district to share, to talk about what our shared interests are. So we've heard from all of these towns, we've heard from staff members and students, where are we aligned and where are our goals and visions similar. And let's do some brainstorming about what we might need with respect to our facilities to meet those goals. And then on November 20th, we'll come together again as a district to contemplate some different scenarios specifically for our facilities. They're pretty broad stroke ideas. Nobody on the school board or the administration is wedded to any one of those ideas. They're really just a way to start the conversation and to think about all the different possibilities we have, and then looking at these goals that we've talked about and how we think we can make a plan together moving forward that's sustainable and that gives the kids the education they deserve. So we're so glad that you're here for this first part of our journey. We hope you'll stay engaged. And I'd like to take the chance to introduce our facilitator who's been with us throughout this process. So this is Susan McCormick, and she is the founder of Creative Discourse. She's also a senior associate with Everyday Democracy, and her career and work has really been steeped in helping communities to build dialogue toward change. So she's really well positioned to help us in our own process, and we're really lucky to have her. So I'm going to turn it over to Sue at this point. Thanks again.
Thanks. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
I'm really happy to be with you. And let's see, this is our 4th town. been a real pleasure to be in this area talking to folks. I'll just tell you a little bit more about myself. I am passionate about local democracy and about people and communities having a say, a meaningful say in decisions that affect them. So that's what I'm all about, and I'm really happy to be here to do this work. And I just want to really acknowledge Krista and Don and community members like Nancy and school board members who have put a lot of work in to make this happen, because it really takes a lot of work to organize these, and they've been just showing up to multiple conversations and helping set things up, and I just really appreciate it. So they've been really dedicated to this process. I wanted to start by just doing some quick introductions, and I'm wondering if people are willing to just stand for this for a few moments, just because for some of us maybe we've been sitting a lot today. And we'll try to make this go quick so that if anybody isn't a fan of standing, they don't have to stand for too long. So I'm just going to ask us to do a quick go around and just say your name, and then if you can say one thing you really love about Starksboro, and it could be just a phrase or a sentence, not a paragraph. And so we'll just do a quick go around and just get everybody a chance to speak. So, Brad, can we start with you?
My name is Brad Johnson. What I love about Starksboro is the community.
Steve Rooney, and I love the fresh air and maple syrup.
Great.
Rob Leotard, mentoring program.
Caleb Elder. I love the different parts of Starksboro, all the different corners, up and down.
Herb Olson, and I'll echo the idea of community. I think we still have a pretty good, strong sense of community.
I'm Erin, and I just like that it's quiet here, but we get to know our neighbors.
Mary, and I would also concur with the community. It's a friendly place.
I'm Nancy Cornell, and I love this school because whenever I come here, it feels like coming home to family.
I'm Andrea Bernay. I think what I love most are my neighbors, and I love our town meeting.
Great. I'm Alexia Potter from the neighbors, and I think what I love most is just being able to be outside so easily.
I'm James Everhardy. Right now I really like fall.
I'm Beth Haar, and I feel like Starksboro is a place where everybody can belong.
I'm Adora Fraser, and I love the number of committed people in the town.
Colin, Brian Lucas. I like how it seems generally everyone supports their neighbors and stuff.
Mike Blakesley, and I like the rural environment and the community.
I'm Keegan Tierney, the history.
I'm Corin Cousineau, and it's hard to pick one, but right now the scenery around here is amazing.
I'm Sarah Haven, and I really like the community here. I think everybody's willing to always help.
I'm Seth Clifford. I guess the people in the environment.
I'm Krista Clifford, and I'd say the mountains.
I'm Liz, and I appreciate the Jerusalem Country Store.
I'm Rich Warren, and I love Robinson School.
I'm Libby Payer, and as a relatively new resident, I love our home, being outside.
I'm Tom Payer. I love the welcoming environment.
I'm Donald, and I also like fall.
Barbara Harrington, and I appreciate the community and the rural aspect of this neighborhood.
Diane Coda, and I like the people in the community and how we all help each other when it's needed.
Great. I'm Rebecca Elder, and I love our community, and this school is an inherent part of that.
I'm David Russell. I'm on the school board here for 10 years. I just appreciate the fact that we've always had a very positive reputation or
positive place to work here. So I've always felt good about it.
I'm Dan Kuzia, and I like the community.
Who else?
Richard Fazy, Digger Fazy. I like the fact that we always pass our school budget.
Anybody else?
And I'm Krista Finner, and I really love town meeting.
Great. Okay, well, in all the towns, I've heard a lot about community and the beautiful environment, but Starksboro is the first place where I've heard from several people that they love town meetings, so that's awesome. That's great. Well, thank you for introducing yourselves. I just want to take a minute and talk a little bit about what we're going to do tonight, and then we'll dive right in. One thing I should let you know, when we started planning these meetings, and I talked with the engagement committee about what they hope to accomplish in these first conversations, I said, well, we need 3 hours. And they said, no way, you can't have 3 hours, it's too much. So we're doing this in 2 hours, and there might be moments where we feel just a little bit rushed, and I apologize for that, but we are trying to hear a lot of your thinking and also be respectful of your time. So I want to give you a heads up about that. And I just want to tell you a little bit about our agenda for tonight. So the first thing that we're going to do to start is to just share some of our own stories and our own experiences around education. And there's a reason for this. When we have conversations about policy issues, we have found that the quality of the conversation goes much better when people first have a chance to make a really personal connection. So that's why we always start with the personal. And then after that, we're going to break into small groups and give you a chance to talk a little bit about some of your hopes for the future of the district and the schools. And we're going to use 4 big picture goals that the district has come up with just as a way to frame the conversation. To give it, and when you read those goals a little later, you'll see that they're very broad and they'll create space for you to talk about pretty much anything that you'd like to. After that, we're going to just give you a chance to talk a little bit about some of the strengths of Robinson School and what you think that they can offer, this school can offer the district. And then if we have time at the end, usually we've been trying to keep about 5 or 10 minutes of open time so that you can talk about whatever is on your mind, okay? And then at the end, we'll talk about next steps. Does that all make sense? One other piece of business. Again, another best practice after years of helping people have conversations. We try to come up with agreements usually, and again, with more time, we have each group come up with their own. But tonight, I just want to, for efficiency's sake, suggest a couple that will just help all of you be able to say what's on your mind. And our hope is that tonight, this is your chance to have your voice heard, so we hope you will be very frank about what you think. So a couple of agreements about how we want to talk together. So first, all ideas get a fair hearing. So if somebody has an idea and you don't like it, that's great, but just try to be curious and keep an open mind, maybe ask some questions. Each person gets a chance to speak. We want to make sure we hear every voice tonight at some point. Speak for yourself, not as a representative of your group. So for example, if you're here and you're a teacher, please don't feel like you have to speak for all the teachers. If you're a parent, don't feel like you have to speak for all the parents. Tonight, it's really about your own personal perspective. It's okay to disagree, but don't make it personal. That's pretty obvious. And then finally, during some of these parts of this conversation, we're going to share some personal stories, and we just want to make sure that those are confidential unless you get permission from the person who told the story to share it. But if you didn't, then just assume that the story should stay here. Is there anything here anyone can't live with? Is there anything missing you'd like to add? Okay. So then let's dive right in. And the first thing, as I said, is that we're going to share some stories. So I just want to give you a moment to reflect quietly about a really memorable experience you had when you were in school. And this can be a really positive experience, or it could be a challenging experience. So I'm going to invite you to turn to the person next to you, and Krista and Barbara is there, sorry. We'll have you two be a pair and then you can go around the circle. And I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes to share your story with the person sitting next to you. And I have a little bell with me because there's a lot of people here, and I'll ring it about halfway through, so if the other person hasn't had a chance to share, you can make sure to switch so you can hear from both people. Okay, go ahead. Does anyone need more time? Has everybody heard? Okay. So, let's hear a couple of stories. If there are some people that shared something really positive that just is memorable, we'd just love to hear a few of those stories.
I'll share. I went to Robinson School in the late 80s, and so I survived a renovation or addition being built here. But I had a lot of great teachers, but I had a really memorable 4th and 5th grade teacher here, and everything she did was grand and on a large scale. So we had a big Mexican Fiesta celebration and a Chinese New Year celebration, and we did a cool Christmas play about Gilligan's Island. I don't know. It was unbelievable. She was amazing, and it was, that's a big memory from being a student here.
Great. So it sounds like a lot of events and celebrations.
Yeah.
I'll say something. I'm Betsy Dunham, and I didn't really hear the question because I was still sitting down, but my kids were students here in the late 80s, and this was before there were after-school programs or anything. Jeff and I both worked. I started work really early and got done a little bit early in order for us to be able to pick up kids, but I still couldn't get here when the school closed. And it was just, the school community was wonderful. My kids were able to be in Miss Maggie's classroom with all of her Legos. If there was something going on in there, they were able to be in the library with all the books. But the school just sort of adopted them for 45 minutes to up to an hour every day. And I just thought, you know, only in a wonderful little town like Starksboro would I find that kind of accommodation. Well, later, you know, by the time my kids were at Mount Abe is when the after-school programs and such came in. So Starksboro realized that we needed to do something more formal. But that sort of set the tone for me, that, you know, this was a community school that you know, just really wanted to make it work.
Did anybody share an experience that, not necessarily at this school, but just in your own education experience that was really challenging for you that stands out? Yes?
And this kind of relates to my kids, you know, in this district, but in terms of my own experience in education, you know, the rubber really hits the road when you get to high school. You know, not too happy when, you know, much happier when you know, you got some really good teachers who really sort of pushing you to do good stuff, and when that wasn't the case, not as happy. And I think that was the case for my kids too.
Well, keep those stories in mind as we do the next thing, and hopefully you guys are going to get a little more talkative. I think you will as we go. Now, I just want to give give you a chance to kind of look ahead a little bit and think about the future. And we're going to do another small group discussion. But I want you to imagine the world 10 years from now. And if you're willing to, you can even close your eyes. I'm going to read some stuff about what might be happening. So I just want you to keep in mind potential trends in technology, globalization, migration, climate change, governance. Those are just a couple of big trends that a lot of people are talking about right now. And when you think ahead 10 years, how do you imagine people will live and socialize and work? And what might be the same as it is now? And what might be different? And keeping all of this in mind, I'm going to invite you now to maybe get into groups of three or four. And the question I want you to talk about in your group is, what do you think our young people need to know and be able to do to be successful in this changing world of ours?
Can you say that one more time?
Yes. What do our young people need to know and be able to do to be successful in our changing world?
Does that relate to the 10-year stuff you said earlier?
Yes. Thinking ahead 10 years. Yeah.
Are we only going to do one thing about the 10 years from now, not all those other things?
You can talk about, I mentioned a lot of things to just help you get a robust picture in your mind about what might be happening in 10 years. And I'm inviting you to talk about anything that you think students need to know and be able to do to be prepared for this world that's coming. So you can talk about any trend that stands out for you. You don't have to talk about any of those trends, but just what do you think students need to know and be able to do. So let's have you get into groups of maybe 4, and just about 5 minutes. Okay, so we're going to bring everyone back together, and Krista has agreed to capture some of your thoughts. But we'd like to go around and hear from each of the groups briefly. Just maybe one highlight from your conversation, and then if we're missing anything after we go around, we'll hear some more. So does this group want to share something that you talked about?
One theme that popped up for us was the idea of the next generation really needs to know how to communicate. Communicate while working through problems, communicate while shifting between different jobs, just communicating with all the changes that are happening, maintaining those communication.
Great, thank you. How about this group?
We talked quite a bit about the idea of incorporating more trades and the need for trade training, and in addition to that, flexibility. Thinking a lot about the potential for needing to rely on a closer knit community rather than outsourcing quite as much, to be able to rely on your neighbors. Individuals within the community need to be able to, supply all those community structures and needs.
Okay, so that connects with the trades. Can you just say just a little more about flexibility, what that means to you? To your group?
The idea that we don't know what 10 years from now exactly will look like, and it could go in so many different directions. Okay. So to be able to adapt to those potential changes.
Great, thank you. Great.
I think one of the main points from us was that we need to be raising critical thinkers that can make decisions for themselves. I think that was kind of your intention, yours too. And I worry about healthy boundaries with technology and making sure that they have them.
Okay, great, thank you. Next group.
Who's actually
I don't know.
We talked about the need for our students to be able to understand and be in contact with a broader range of other cultural groups and understand the wider world better than they might, better than what they get in the context of a small, isolated New England community.
Can you just say a little bit about why you thought that was important?
Well, we think that there's a lot of, there's going to be a lot more interaction between cultures. It may have to do with migration, or we may find that Vermont becomes culturally more diverse, and certainly the world is getting to be a more crowded, more complicated place, and we are all interacting, bumbling through it, but we're all interacting very vigorously these days.
Thank you. With this group.
We talked about the speed at which our kids and all of us are gonna need to have to navigate information and assess, evaluate quality of information. And we also talked about, in the midst of those changes, the need for people to have skills of compassion and an ethical framework. And our third thing was, environmental awareness and information.
We talked, there are a lot of common themes, but I think we talked a lot about flexible thinking, and that ethically they were going to have to navigate maybe some really difficult situations, and also that we want them to be able to really advocate for themselves and to kind of think locally and act globally.
Okay, so we spent, I think, really most of our time talking about the need for students, and when they get older, to be able to really dialogue, really converse, and interrelate with people. And the challenges that our technology these days poses in terms of building those skills, really being able to sit down or meet somebody and actually have a good conversation, a meaningful conversation. We had some negative things to say sometimes about cell phones and that whole idea, and we all know that that happens. We also know that the technology isn't going to go away, and so maybe the schools are going to need to be, or parents in schools and everybody are going to have to encourage and teach our kids how to have those sort of meaningful dialogues, even with this technology that tends to push against that.
Okay, just one thing I'd like to say. The thing that you can go for a doctor's appointment and you sit in a room of 15 people and nobody's saying a word, nobody's looking, there's just no interaction. And that's just a glimpse of basically society today. And to me, it's robbing our people, all of us, and you're kind of weird if you say hi to somebody. That's a sad state of affairs.
Thank you. This group.
I think a lot of the same themes that have come up, we talked about the need for the lack of communication with technology and needing to address those issues. There's some isolation, moving outside of our local community to gain a perspective and providing a perspective in from afar that will help appreciate what we have here, but also learn how others engage and what's going on. And then there's also, we talked about the changing environmental issues and climate issues as well too, and needing to adapt and learn how we're going to help prepare ourselves for a changing world.
Great, thank you. So there were a lot of themes that really came out around adaptability, the wise use of technology, the ability to communicate and be flexible to deal with a wider range of people. Were there any ideas that your group talked about that didn't make it up here yet that you want to make sure that we capture? So I'm going to invite you to keep these in mind as we move forward to the next piece. So now what we want to do is give you a chance to keep talking about the future, but around some goals that the district has identified. And the first thing I want to do is just invite you to pull those out. They're in your green packet. And it's a piece of paper. It has 4 goals on it. And I'm wondering if somebody would be willing to just read through those 4 goals so that we can all hear them out loud together.
I will. All MAUSD students will achieve academic excellence in an innovative and flexible learning environment. Second one, all MAUSD students will develop their social, emotional, and physical well-being. Third one, all MAUSD students will build connections with local and global communities through authentic work that promotes citizenship and meaningful relationships. The last one, all MAUSD students will learn in equitable, culturally responsive, and inclusive environments.
Great, thank you, and I appreciated the loud voice. So when you look at those goals, how do they seem to align with the conversation that we just had and the things that you all came up with? I see some people kind of shrugging and saying.
The global community piece really came through. A lot of people talked about outside communities and thinking locally and acting globally.
Yeah. Any other observations about the alignment between the goals and this list that you all just came up with? Nancy?
Certainly there was lots of talk about flexibility and really innovation.
You know, just the way this is structured, we spent a good deal of time talking about one issue, but you know, there were a lot of other issues that I think we might want to talk about. So, I mean, the issue of academic excellence is really important, but you know, we just didn't talk about it. You know, there's only so much time, right?
So that's a great segue, because that's exactly what we're going to do.
So you know, in terms of what relates, I mean, we didn't talk about academic excellence, but you know, that goal is really important.
Yeah.
And I'd love to talk more about that.
Great, that's coming up right now, but let's get to one more person and then
I wanted to say, sort of similar to what Herbie was saying, that the second one about the students developing their social, emotional, and physical well-being, that's also a really important goal. And I think that among our themes, that was not particularly central. You know, that we kind of lose sight of the fact that, you know, these are our children, and we need to help them, you know, through their struggles, through all of this, that we, as adults want to impose on them because you need to be able to deal with this complicated world.
Right.
So I think that's another one that we need to keep in mind as we go.
So right now, what we are going to do is break up into small groups so that you can talk a little bit about each of these goals and what they mean to you. And what we want to do again is ask you to look ahead 5 years and imagine that the school district has done a really fantastic job meeting these goals. What is it that you would expect to experience and see and hear in the schools if they did a really good job? So the way we're going to do this is we're going to break up into 8 groups, and we're going to have groups 1 through 4 on this side of the room, and group 5 through 8 on this side of the room. And in your group, you're going to have a chance to spend a little bit of time talking about one goal, and then we're going to switch the goal around so that every group has a chance to talk about all 4 of these goals. And I'm going to pass out some worksheets, and we're going to ask you to provide your feedback about each of these things. We want to invite you to think about whether you noticed any themes that kept coming up across the different goals. Were there ideas that you kept seeing, even though you might have been talking about different goals that seemed familiar, like you had seen them before? Any overarching themes that you noticed?
I think it argued the importance of excellent teachers.
I think community engagement with mentors and service groups that could also stimulate physical activities, physical well-being and social emotional well-being, as well as flexible learning environments, those sort of tie together.
Okay. Yes.
Maybe exposure to a variety of opportunities.
Yes.
Along the line, same group, sort of potentially reaching outside the district in order to encounter things that the district might not have available, be it ethnic, be it that sort of thing.
I just want to make
Diversity.
sure I heard, reaching outside the district to encounter things the district may not have
May not have available, may not be able to provide itself. You know, a more diverse environment, ethnically, or a wide range of possibilities, but the idea of not trying to solve everything in the district if there's a way of encountering, being involved with something outside the district that would accomplish it.
Great, great. Yes, Nancy.
We got talking about the predicting while hoping, I think, that in 5 years there'd be much more access to affordable early childcare in our 5 towns. And also, we got talking about predicting that we have discovered some more innovative scheduling, more flexible, innovative scheduling that would enable kids and grown-ups to make more connections through mentoring and internships and that sort of thing.
Great. Any last thing someone wants to get out that they noticed about this? Did you all feel like you had about enough time, or was it really rushed?
Pretty rushed.
Pretty rushed, yeah, yeah. A little hard to try to get that all in a couple hours. Well, we really appreciate you doing that. I just want to let you know, we're going to talk about next steps at the end of the meeting, but we're taking all of this data from each of the towns, and we're going to be looking through it. We're going to share notes with you, and also the themes that we see when we comb through all of your comments, and you'll be getting that back, and that will be going to district leaders as well. we have two things left to do this evening. One is we want to sit here and talk and hear from you about some of the strengths that you think your school brings to the district, especially in light of your vision about where you hope things will go. And then we're going to have just a few minutes at the end for anything anyone wants to talk about. So let's start there, keeping in mind some of those goals that you've just been talking about and your vision for what you hope the future brings. What are some special strengths that this school here has to offer that you want to make sure the district knows about, takes advantage of? Yes.
I would say dedicated professional staff.
Yes.
I would say there's a sense in the school that that it's like a family, that all of the staff feels very responsible towards all of the kids, and the kids feel that they are under the care of all of the staff. And I think that's partly because it's a small community.
Yes.
Well, I'm pretty prejudiced, but
Would you mind speaking up?
I have asthma, so
Got it.
there's only so much I can.
We'll listen as well as we can then.
We have a fabulous mentoring program. It makes a world of difference. And I know that the other schools are working on it, but we're way ahead of them.
Yes.
I think we use the outdoor classroom really well, and that's been a fairly recent, like last few years. And I think we've been leaders in that. I could be wrong about that. We are leaders in that.
Yes.
Yeah, I think, not to be too Pollyannish about it, but I think there's a good deal of trust between the school, the Robinson School, and its community, you know, whether parents or non-parents. That it is great. You know, we've had a tradition of town meeting. We don't have schools anymore, but I think that's an expectation that Starksboro brings to the bigger district that I think is good.
So a strength and an expectation. Yeah, a strength and an expectation. Okay. Go ahead, Nancy.
I think that our school has had a long history of a commitment to equity in the sense of a focus on making sure that all kids get what they need, and an understanding that kids have differences and they need different things. And I think that's been an ethic in this school, certainly since when my kids went here.
Did you have your hand up?
Solar power.
Oh, what? Oh, solar power. Solar power. I'd love to hear from this side of the room.
I think it's my understanding that there hasn't been a ton of staff turnover in the last couple of years either, and I think that shows a really highly dedicated staff and a school that is a place you want to work.
Yes.
I don't know how to say this in a short amount of words, so
You don't have
I'm
to.
just going to ramble for a second. The staff parent community relationship in the school is really supportive and really trusting, and I think that's echoing what a few folks said. But for me, it's exemplified in the way the ski program runs, and that students get out early. We find funding for the kids that can't afford it. Teachers let kids go, and parents take them to Area, and it's just it's kind of a magical thing, and I don't know what the singular words are that you can write on that chart, but.
Ski program. Ski
The magical evidence of the ski program.
The magical ski program.
Magical evidence of the staff parent.
piggyback on Keegan, but I think that I was just thinking about the number of people who volunteer in our schools that are not parents. There are certainly lots of parents, but I think this school has an overwhelming number of people that come in for, you know, the weekend snack program, for Four Winds is not just parents, for the ski program, for mentoring. There's a number of, I mean, it's not uncommon to see 5 different community members here when you stop in to pick your kid up for a doctor's appointment. So that's pretty awesome.
Great. Yes.
So when I go to open house or special events, or if I go to a Wednesday morning meeting with the whole school, one of the things that's really obvious in the school is how many grandparents come to this, how many attend any of those larger programs in the school. And I think that speaks to the long-term feeling. I think several people were referring to that. The long-term feeling of generations now of feeling comfortable in this building and wanting and knowing that their kids are getting the best in this building.
Yes, Haley.
I like, I think it's special how this space that we're in is used both by the town and the school in Starksboro, and just that when there's voting, when there's a voting day, that's sort of happening in here while school's still in session, you know, and at times, and just the way that this space really is shared between the town and the school, I think, is a neat feature of the Starksboro way of doing things.
I would say that because I work in this school and I've worked in this school for many, many years, I think I have always felt like the town trusts what we're doing and supports what we're doing. Whether everybody is always in agreement of every single thing we do, it's not going to be true, but there's a general sense of we know what we're doing and we're trusted by our community.
It's redundant now. A number of people have said it. I feel that the town holds the school. And it holds the school through that trust and through the volunteers and through showing up. I mean, we have just about 100% of families come to parent conferences, and the open house is just packed. It's a crush of humanity in here. So it's really held by the community very, very, in a very healthy way, I think.
I would call the school the glue of this community. We don't have a store anymore. We don't have a meeting space where a lot of people come together, but this is the place, whether you're young or old, it's definitely the glue.
It's a beautiful way to say that. That's a wonderful list. And
well, you can't just sneak in and not say something.
Nice try. Why don't we, almost 2 hours ago, we stood in a circle and we introduced ourselves, and people went around and said one thing they love about Starksboro. So if you're willing to say your name and something you love about the town, that would be awesome.
Yeah. Louis Dumont, very sorry that I'm so late, ridiculously late, but had to get here anyway. I think that educating our children is about the most important thing that people can get together to do. And that it's the most basic, one of the most basic things that our government, government that we institute by our trust and our participation. It's the most elemental democratic thing we can do. And so I really treasure what goes on here and its relation to voters, parents, taxpayers is just a core of democracy, I think.
encourage you to maybe talk with someone after the meeting about what we've been
I will,
talking
yeah.
about,
Yeah.
creating a vision for the future. If we're ready to move on from this great list, we have a little bit of time, and we've been leaving a little bit of open time at the end of these. We know that the merger happened. There's a lot that's happened in the last couple of years, and we wanted to make it possible for people to just talk about anything they want to. Hopes that you have, concerns that you have. So the meeting is yours for the next few minutes to speak about anything you want to related to your schools or the district.
So I just wanted to say that I think that the schools should really lead by example, and we are in the midst of a climate crisis, and the schools need to really take responsibility and show how they can be not only healthy places to have our students be educated in, but be leaders in terms of using less fossil fuels and being more responsible environmentally.
Yes.
I don't want to put a damper on things, but I will. I think that the people in this audience are not really representative of the general population, and the attitudes of this audience are not the attitude of the general parental support that teachers see in the classroom. And the goals that we set out tonight don't really acknowledge the difficult classroom environment that today's teachers is facing. It doesn't acknowledge that students come into a classroom with a shorter attention span than a squirrel. They lack resilience. The teacher doesn't have the parental support is in the majority of cases as they once did in a classroom. The total absorption, self-absorption of a student, and the fact that students come into the classroom thinking that negative reactions to stressful situations is an appropriate behavior. And these goals are not acknowledging the very difficult position that teachers are in, and trying to manage these kind of characteristics of students that are coming into the classroom. It makes achieving these laudable goals that we have almost secondary to dealing with the presence of the character of the student in the classroom and managing that student's behavior in the classroom. And I think there's just kind of been a white elephant in the room that has not been talked about. I mean, we've got all these nice laudable goals, but the truth of the reality in the classroom is it's a much more difficult and hostile environment for a teacher than is capable of achieving all of these laudable goals.
I wonder if there are a few teachers in the room who might be willing to speak to their own experience around what you're...
I am a teacher.
Okay.
So
that
was my experience as a
great,
teacher.
great. Okay. What do other people think about that? Yes.
As a teacher in the district, I teach in Moncton. I really appreciate you bringing that up. I think that our students are very clearly my first priority, as I am a mom also, but I think that taking care of our staff and our teachers is also something that should be a priority for our district moving forward. And really acknowledging that, yes, children have changed. And the things that they are coming in with from home are different than when we were in school. And teachers aren't necessarily trained for that. That's not in the how to teach manual that we go through in undergrad. And so really putting that emphasis on behavioral support and wraparound, I think, is really important.
I'm also a teacher. I teach at Winooski High School. And I want to echo that the challenges within the classroom are much more different than the challenges that when I was a student in high school. and that it's really an entire system overhaul that needs to happen. So in the face of climate change, in the face of a 10-year future where we don't know what it's going to look like, the system that we have students going through currently right now of take the classes, get your A's, get your B's, get your core credits, and then go on, just doesn't fit what is coming into the future. We don't live in this industrial model anymore. It's all about change being the constant thing. So that even if we're going to have these goals, the larger goal is the system itself, the access to getting into further education or pursuing trades or just changing yourself as the future goes on. Our schools need to embody that, and they need to start with addressing the large issue of apathy and motivation, that when the future is unknown, it's easy to just sit back and say, I'm out, like I'm checking out, I'm gonna go on my phone, I'm not gonna communicate and try to figure out the problems. Our schools need to address that immediately up front and say, what is your motivation? How do we help you define what your motivation in life is, so that you can react and change in a constantly changing world?
Yes.
So I'm also a teacher in the district. I teach at Bristol. I also appreciate what you have all said. I think one of the things that I think about, or that I see at our school, is just a lot of kids who are, we have a large population of kids who are in foster care or whose parents are incarcerated, and a lot of kids who have really significant behavioral needs in our classrooms. And at Bristol, we're getting larger class sizes, and our staff has really been diminished to the point where in our first grade classes, there are 21 kids in the classrooms with no additional support, just a classroom teacher. And it's difficult. So having lofty goals is great and admirable, but making sure the teachers and the kids get the support they need. I feel like there's maybe a lot of personnel that we've hired that's not really interacting with kids in our schools.
Well, thank you so much for bringing that up. Led to some good discussion, people to think about. Are there any other topics people want to talk about?
Yeah, I am very concerned about which schools will end up getting defunded or closed over the next few years. And we're watching it going to be happening in Jen's district and the Middlebury district. Seems like there are rumors about what might be happening in this district. And so all this about how lovely our school is great. But if in 3 years we're going to be shut down, that's a real big concern.
So, to sort of piggyback on that a little bit, I'm actually concerned about the governance structure of our district. I think that when I voted on our district, I wasn't clear on the governance structure that was explained to me at the annual meeting last year when they presented a non-budget budget. And out of that meeting, I was told that essentially our board is advisory only, and they can only hold the superintendent to basically evaluate him or guide him towards the goals of the district. So I get concerned if that's the case, and our board really is only advisory when it comes down to closing schools, if it's up to one person's decision. Like I said, I'm concerned about the governance structure.
Isn't it correct to say that the town would need to vote to close the school? For the school?
That's correct.
Caleb,
Which is unlike in Virginia's district. The board has the authority to close one of the schools regardless of the town's
That's my understanding.
Yeah.
That Virgin's the towns had to vote to close the schools, but the board has the power to overrule their vote.
So I would say, first of all, I would say thank you to the people on the Articles of Association board that put that in there, because I think that's great.
Dawn, I'm just going to invite you if you want. Do you want to say just any clarifying information about how decision-making happens?
Well, there are a couple of people, other people in the room too, who sat on the Act 46 board. And, it was a long discussion for that group to be sure that we covered that concern. The board can make a recommendation, but it is really up to the town to make the final decision. And we spent a lot of time on that. And Nancy was a member as well. I was on that group, and that was an important article. In fact, it was so important that we made sure it actually appeared on the ballot. But I would say one thing we didn't think about at the time and didn't talk about and didn't write any articles about was the question of whether the grade levels in any given school could be changed by a decision of the board. And that whole conversation is, as we see in our neighboring school districts, that whole conversation is up in the air.
Can you say what's happening in other districts? They're making it smaller.
Well, for example, this school could become a K-4 school rather than a K-6 school by a decision of the board. It could be a K-4 school that includes kids from other towns. Bristol Elementary could become a 5-8 school. So there are lots of different permutations that the board could decide on that aren't restricted by that article of agreement.
Just to go back to this person's comment, is it just a point of clarification? So is it true that with decisions around reconfiguring grades or possibly closing a school or anything like that, that's a decision of the board rather than a decision of the superintendent?
Well, the board can't decide to close a school, but we could make a recommendation of a reconfiguration of grades.
So that would come from the board, that recommendation. Okay.
And then who decides? Who is the board making that recommendation to?
Well, the board could decide to bring that to a vote, or it could decide to just do it.
The board, it doesn't then go to the superintendent. The board has the power.
Right, to make that kind of a decision.
So it's not a recommendation at that point.
But who would vote? The residents of Starksboro or the residents of MAUSD?
On changing grade configurations, you mean, or on closing a school?
Both.
On closing a school, it's the people who live in the town where the school resides make that decision. And on the configuration change? Well, again, that could be brought to a vote, or it could be a decision of the board made without a vote.
So as long as the school is open and educating children, that decision could be made that we didn't choose to close your school. Your school is open and it's educating children. It's just a different system than it used to be.
Right.
Does that include housing central office? Does that include housing central office, or is it hands-on kids in building?
That's a really good question, but I would assume it's kids in the building.
I just wonder if it, if the intent was to allow the town to vote by making major changes to the school. That may not have been specifically addressed, but it seems like that might be contrary to the intent of having a town vote if major changes are made to the school. That's just my opinion.
How much pressure do we get from the state? We can vote to not close the school, but as a state, how much power do they have to influence that or act against that? Or
it's really financial. I mean, once the student population drops below a certain level, and we're starting to experience it now, we're butting up against the per pupil spending limit before we're starting to pay a penalty on that. So in some sense, you do have the choice to pay the penalty and keep things sort of as they are, regardless of the cost. But that's where the pressure comes from the state.
But does the state withhold funds at that point?
No, they'll ask for more if you're not sure.
Yeah, well, I do worry about that, and what Steve talked about there is this excess spending threshold that we were close to last year, and that the Addison Northwest District was even closer to. And our cost per equalized pupil, which is the sort of metric that appears on our ballot each year, the amount that's going up, and that's also the metric that excess spending is judged on. You know, when you have a student population that's going down at all, that really works against you in that formula. And then when you have fixed costs going up, as in another 12% hike in our just statewide average healthcare costs, that hits everybody who's paying for health insurance. That certainly includes our school district. You know, those are two factors. If you haven't done anything, you're opening the exact same school you had yesterday, and you've already got a big jump in your equalized pupil number, and you're getting closer to that excess spending threshold. And that excess spending threshold is not like a little deal. It's like a big penalty. It is a crushing line, which I would say we shall not pass if we expect to have a passed budget. I think it's pretty black and white. So that's a thing that, yeah, is a looming concern, and is, I think, what drives a lot of the budget formulations that we're doing are kind of done under that pressure.
Caleb, are those calculations done per school or through the district?
Those are now done for the whole district. So because we are now one district, when we calculate equalized number of students, of course we know how many are in each school, but the total is the total, around 1,300.
So Chris was going to say something.
So I was just going to say that these are all really great and important questions and information that we're sharing, and it's way too big for right now, and it's what we're going to start delving into on the 5th and the 20th, because, well, a couple things. One, the board, it's really, you know, half of us are here, it's your neighbors and fellow community members who really don't want to be in the position of divining what all of our communities really want to do about this problem that we are all grappling with. We really are bringing folks together because we want more people thinking about this with us. And so the more folks understand all of these different pieces, which are very complicated, but I think we can get to some basic understanding together. We've asked our superintendent to provide some demographics for our next meeting, kind of a state of the district, a sense of what some of the drivers are that are state-driven and out of our control, what's in our control. But you know, this effort, it's about identifying shared interests and goals to sort of shore up our commitment to really work together to figure out how we can move forward in a way that we can live with, that we think is sustainable, that still hold on to what is most important to us, given some of these challenges. So, so there's so much more on this thread to share, and we will get there, but it's too big for the 5 minutes we have left, and we're really committed to having people end and be able to go home when we said you would. But to that end, please come on the 5th, where we can, we're going to talk a little bit more about this information, and then on the 20th sort of grapple with, okay, well, what would it look like if we did this or we did this? Because while the board can make a recommendation, I don't think anybody on the board wants to be in the position of making it without knowing what as many people in our community really feel about that. So we really want you to also bring folks whose voices are not here, because that's equally important. That the folks that are getting this information and are engaging with it are as diverse as possible and represent all of the different slices of our communities. So that's also work we could really use help with. And also, I just wanted to share what's going to happen after the 20th. The board and the administration are going to look at all of this input and try to decide what next steps to take. So that might, so if it's a bond for Mount Abe, or if it's reconfiguring schools or whatever it is, it's going to require significant time and financial investment. And we're really committed to not making that investment without getting all this input first. And that would continue to involve the community and move us toward getting a better sense of where we are in our facilities planning. Our budget's really demanding that we figure some of these things out, or some of our facilities are really demanding that we figure some of this out, so we are moving that conversation forward, but in as engaging and collaborative a way as possible. The other next step I wanted to tell you about is that this input that you've shared around the strategic goals is also really important. The district is operating under those goals now, but has a strategic planning oversight team as well as implementation groups, and those folks are going to get all of this information. So they have a sense of what the community is looking for in terms of the outcome of those, the achievement of those goals. I think those are the key takeaways that I want to share.
Should we be talking to our legislature about changing the formula so we don't have these same pressures on such an important
my own personal take on that is yes. Because it really, as you're defining, it's, we have only this much of the pie that we can control, and then it goes up from there. And so I think that it is a conversation for legislators as well.
So what I'll just say to wrap up is, maybe I'll just describe in 30 seconds what the next meeting is and what the meeting on the 20th is. So on the 5th, we're going to share the themes from all of this work that we've done so far, and we're going to share back with you what we've heard from all of the towns and staff and students, what matters. The other thing that's going to happen on the 5th is we're going to provide an opportunity for you all to do some visioning work around facilities. So given what matters and what the goals are, what kind of buildings and facilities do we need to get there? And then, as Krista said, on the 20th, that's really when you're going to get some, we'll get it on the 5th so that you can look at it ahead of the next meeting. That's where you're going to get some demographic data and some other information. And then on the meeting on the 20th, you're going to have a chance to look at a bunch of different scenarios and really talk about what are some of the benefits and trade-offs of each of those. So the board is sharing their grappling with all of you, because there aren't really easy answers about any of this stuff. And we just really appreciate you giving us 2 hours of this evening to come and think about all of this important stuff. And it's just been great to be in all the towns. We've had a really nice turnout in all of the towns, and people clearly are very invested and care a lot about what's happening here. And I think that I have a lot of confidence that even though I know you're facing some hard decisions, that you're going about it in a really thoughtful way. So I just feel really privileged to be part of this process, so I'm glad you were here. As you leave, there's a little evaluation on the wall, so if you want to just say how you thought the meeting was and add any comments. And if anybody is still hanging on to one of those sheets, please make sure to give it to me or Krista so that we incorporate all of the data from that part of the meeting. So thank you for coming.
Thank you.